Mate, can I just say, your story is absolutely nuts. How did it feel being potentially face to face with death?
Wow, that's a good question. So first of all, I think I was never actually face to face with death. So I know the narrative sometimes that the story I put out would have the effect that you would think that that's the case. I think I never actually was. It was just the illusion in my mind that I was, right? So to explain a little bit more, I think about 8 years ago now, I was in uni and then I got faced with a tumor on my jaw. So it was just a casual doctor visit that like no one expected anything bad from. And then they said, well, wait, you have a tumor and we need 7 days more to figure out whether it's cancer or just surgery is enough. And you get some statistics. I think there was a 35% chance it's cancer. So the odds were very much in my favor. But it was then the illusion of death. So I had a very silly job that basically just made me sit there and watch boxes of milk. I'll leave that story for another time. And just sitting there with a brain that was doing nothing and looping in this negative thought and like, what if this goes wrong? What if then this goes wrong? What if then this goes wrong? Created the illusion of being faced with death, and that created the perspective to then start doing things differently, if that makes sense.
Yeah, maybe this is such a stupid question, but what part about death actually felt scary to you?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it was to give a little bit more context, like I was living my life up to that point. So I always had a quite easy time at school, went to uni, didn't have a clue like which study I should pick. So I just went with business because like I didn't know what to do and it was very broad. And I was just doing what everyone expected of me, right? So all of a sudden, when then you kind of live in the assumption that life is very endless. And I know this is very cliche, but once your brain believes that all of a sudden it isn't endless anymore and it might be limited. So whether it's true or not, I think the fact that my brain believed it to be true, that then creates some kind of urgency with like, why am I doing all of this? All of a sudden it created the muscle of like questioning everything. Like, why am I choosing this path? Why am I showing up in this way? Am I doing this for me, for my mom, for my dad, for who am I doing this? So I think the illusion of death creates just like a deep questioning of why am I even doing this? That would be my main answer.
I I often wonder why sometimes we are more motivated by the costs of living our current life rather than the rewards we reap or we can reap from changing our lives. It almost seems like we're always motivated by the negative and not the potential positive.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think our brains are generally wired in a negative way, right? So I think as we as human beings developed, our brains are wired to keep us alive, right? So it's very useful for our brain of every path that we create to see the negatives and the dangers of it, right? Instead of seeing all the upsides. Because
Yeah.
back in the day, the dangers could have been life threatening at any case. But then nowadays, the dangers of whatever you do are not life threatening anymore. They are just a loss in status or like a loss in career trajectory. But we still deem them with the same importance as if they threaten our existence. So this is why I think we're kind of negatively biased, which is also why you might be, and please tell me if this is true for you, but you might sometimes be in a bad mood for no reason.
Yeah.
But how often are you in a good mood for no reason?
Yeah, that's so true. That's so good. I saw Alex Hormozy speak about that as well. I saw him speak about Chris Williamson that he was like, if people are allowed to be in a bad mood for absolutely no reason, why don't you just be in a good mood for no reason? You have no
Yeah,
excuse. Like people justify us being in a bad mood for no reason, and then they get surprised by when they see someone in really happy for no reason.
yeah, yeah. It could actually be that subconsciously it's from there because I think he had a tweet about this where it was something along the lines of the greatest skill is to be in a good mood when there's nothing like no reason to be in a good mood for. So probably I should dedicate this one to him. That's
No,
true.
no, it's fine. It's your quote nowadays. It's fine. I do think there's also weird paradox where once we acknowledge the costs of living our current life, and then we're motivated by that, but then we can actually be paralyzed by the price we pay to live the next life that we truly desire. And I think the paradox is, I think real regret forms when we're motivated or we realize that the price to pay was a lot cheaper than the costs we endure, if that makes sense.
Hmm. So you mean the price we pay right now, or the price we pay over time
So
in the future?
I think real regret forms when we realize that, for example, let's say even something as simple as, oh, I find that girl pretty. Do I go approach her? Well, the price to pay is, ooh, a potentially awkward conversation, and
Hmm.
potentially I look like an idiot. But the cost of not doing it is, well, I never get to speak to her, and
Yeah,
I'm gonna, and I feel like real regret forms when we realize that cost of not actually
yeah,
speaking to that girl was a lot more expensive than the price of looking like an idiot or having that small awkward conversation.
yeah, yeah. So I think the thing, and there's an exercise actually on this when you're choosing your career trajectory, but I think it exactly applies to the same as approaching a girl, as taking a little risk in the zoomed in perspective, right? So it's called the Odyssey plan. And basically, the only variable that you change of the thing you're about to do is time. So imagine now you think, I need to approach this girl. It feels scary. She might reject me. I don't want to do it, right? But now add time to it. So now say, I'll never do this for the next 50 years. All of a sudden, the cost of not doing it now is like a life lived alone. Well, maybe you seek to connect, as probably we all do, romantically. So if you leverage the time or extrapolate the time to a very long extent, we can get a sense of how it would feel like if we don't have it. So let me reframe to the exercise for a little bit. So if you're in a career and you're thinking, well, should I stay in the career or should I change to a different career path? We think we can't figure it out, but as humans, we can imagine how something would feel like, even though we've never actually experienced it. So if I'm on a career trajectory, so I studied a master's in strategic consultancy. So when I was working in strategic consultancy in the beginning, I only had, like, for example, a year of experience. But now I could say, okay, Freek, imagine you do this for 5 more years in exactly the same way you do it today. How would I feel after 5 years? And then sit with that. Just like I like to write or close your eyes, but just sit with the feeling. And all of a sudden, you get a pretty vivid feeling of how this would feel. So you don't even have to experience it to get a guess of how it would be like to do it for 5 more years. Now, let's say I'll take an alternative path. So I'll go for my plan B. Imagine for 30 seconds, how would this be? And then how would I feel now after 5 years? Okay, now I would feel slightly different, maybe better, maybe worse. I don't know, but I get a feeling. Now, say I go full risk, right? Like we can get without experience it, we can still get a guess or a good feeling of how it would be like to make the move just by adding time. What would happen if I don't change anything for the next 5 years? And now all of a sudden, the negative consequences that are might be small today might be extreme if I continue the behavior for 5 years. So I think by adding time, we can kind of make the initial pain smaller and make the big pain of not doing it bigger. Does that make sense to you?
So it's almost like ensuring that the costs then become more expensive than the price.
Yes, yes, exactly. That's well put.
Why do you think we often struggle with that?
So I just think it's very hard for us to see the future pain compared to the pain that's like ahead of us, right? So you almost have to overrule your instinctive thinking rationally with this, right? Because instinctively, it's like, I feel nervous. I might be rejected. This hurts. Let me not do it because I'm optimizing for minimum pain, right? So you have to rationally overrule your system. So I think it's very, I think you can train this. It's like a muscle you can train, but then still you have to consciously interrupt your patterns, kind of. So I think it's not natural for us to do it, but then I do think it's very beneficial to train that muscle over time.
It's so fascinating that I feel like we everyone looks at the tumor in your story as almost something negative, but sometimes it almost can. I'm sure you look at it now as a blessing. I'm
Hmm.
always wondering, or I'm scared that I won't be able to make bold decisions in my life without needing a crisis. And I know that sounds
Hmm.
so weird to think about, saying like, why would you want a crisis in your life? And obviously, I'm grateful for the life I have, but I'm always scared
Hmm.
that if I don't get a disturbing crisis in my life, I can't make bold decisions in my life.
Hmm. Hmm. I get the point. So there's a few things I would like to zoom in on. So first of all, I think with the tumor, I I really see it as a blessing nowadays, but I don't think it was that big of a health scare even, right? It
Really?
was in my brain it was at the time, but when I look back at it and when you hear different stories, I think it's nothing. So I also don't want to use it too much because it kind of feels to me like
Mm.
it wasn't even that bad. But to me, the illusion at the time was very pattern interrupting. So for that, I'm super happy. I do think this is where self-reflection comes in, right? Because obviously, I understand what you say. Like sometimes a deep low would help to then just have limitless motivation to go,
Yeah.
but then connecting with a deep why through self-reflection could mimic the same thing. Like I think we can use our imagination to the extent that we allow our imagination to be used, right? So if you just sit with yourself and you create like a kind of an anti-vision. So you say like, let's imagine I don't do any of the things that I aspire to do, and my life amounts to nothing that I want. And how would that feel? And not just think about it for a second, but really imagine it and really try to feel the pain that this would bring to you if those things are that important to you, or you think they are that important to you. So I think we can kind of imagine our way there, but obviously it would be different than having a real crisis. But I think wanting a crisis would be very counterproductive in any way. But I get the point.
Yeah, I guess my initial feeling was because this podcast almost was born out of a mini crisis or self reflection of a crisis. And
Hmm.
I think it's very important to be able to be self introspective about yourself. And you, I love that you call yourself not the answer giver, but the question master.
Hmm.
What are questions we should consistently ask ourselves to figure out what we truly want?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question yourself, actually. Um, so first of all, I want to add one more thing to the previous question because I think it's important to mention. I
Yeah,
think nowadays, I mean, how old are you precisely?
I'm 20.
Yeah, 20. So I'm 26. So let's say we're both just babies, right? In some way. So I think nowadays there's a great upside of our generation and a great downside. I see it more as an upside, but it works in both ways. So we have social media. You at any point in every day you see what someone in Australia is doing, what someone in the Netherlands is doing, what someone in Spain is doing, what someone in the US, your age, different ages, you're faced with all the potentials of every path that you might consider once. So the opportunities are endless. Then there's AI. Basically, you could do anything. So this is amazing, right? My grandparents would have wished they had this opportunity, but at the same time, I mean, this creates delusional patterns of like I need a crisis to fulfill my goal. But then if we would go really deeper, is that even the point of living? Like what's even the point, right? The point is to have a good time, or it's up to you to define what the point is. But the point, no one will say like you have to have a $1 million podcast, you have to have, these are all self-inflicted. So I just wanted to name that because I think it's very important. I'm really ambitious. I like to chase for goals, but I think it's also important to anchor yourself that it doesn't go at the cost or it doesn't consume everything else. But that's up to you to determine that for yourself. So that was the answer to that. And then what are good questions we should ask ourselves? I think two questions that immediately come to mind is just why am I even doing this? Just like why sometimes, because sometimes we just do something, right? But then checking in like why am I doing this, and then a more practical question that's basically the same would be a question from James Clear: what am I optimizing for? And there's no right or wrong. Like you can in your career, like in your career view, you can optimize for money, and that's okay. You can optimize for expressing yourself. You can optimize for getting to know like-minded people within a company team. You can optimize for growth. It can be a combination of those things with different accents. But what are you optimizing for? And the fun thing is, it's up to you to decide. So there's no right or wrong. I just think there's your answer. And I tend to check in with myself because these answers tend to change over time. And once you ask it, it also becomes clear why you're doing something. And then this serves as motivation immediately.
Is there a way we can ensure that we're not lying to ourselves? Because sometimes I feel like when I ask myself, what do I truly want? I still provide an answer that may subconsciously fit with someone else's path and not my own path.
Yeah. Yeah. Good question again. I think like the thing is, to what extent do you really know, right? So there's exercises you can do for this. So you could, for example, go, this is an exercise I use sometimes. You could say like, what do I want? And then you give an answer. And then you say, but what do I really want? And then your answer might change. And then you say, but what do I really, really want? And then like just doing these playful exercises with yourself, because this takes 5 minutes, right? You'll get to a point. And it's not that you sit down and now you figured your life out, right? This is an ongoing muscle that you create of getting to know yourself. So I would say there's not a frame like, hey, Rishi, do this, and now it's fixed. I would say it's the practice of getting to know yourself on a deep level. So the practice of journaling, the practice of being curious, both about, okay, I did this, then I felt this way, then I did this, and now I felt this way. Why is that? I showed up yesterday like this. Why is that? He or she made me feel like this. Why is that? Like just creating this muscle, and then over time, and this will go faster than you think, but by creating this introspective, curious muscle, over time, you'll get close to why you do things. I don't know. I don't think you'll ever get there fully because it will always change, but you'll get close. You'll get a good feeling, and for me, that's more than enough.
Yeah, and I think what's really cool about your story as well is that you were able to ask these questions. And the reason I get inspired by someone like you is because not only did you ask the questions, you took action on the questions. Who do I know that randomly go to Australia? You know, who do I know that randomly start a clothes company? And then who do I know that start a book? I feel like action itself is one of the most vital pieces after you do your self introspection.
Yeah, yeah. It's actually funny that you say it, and thanks for the compliment that's inside of that. But the page is called "We Think Deeply," right? But in my paid programs or like I run cohorts and stuff, I oftentimes frame as that we act boldly. So the frame of the cohort would be we think deeply, we figure it out, but then we act boldly because people could consume all the questions that I'm posting, right? And there's probably people consuming all of them. But I think the value of the content you consume is equal to the amount of action you take afterwards. Because if I'm consuming today for 16 hours, if I'm consuming Alex Hormozy, Ali Abdal, whatever productivity or self-development male or female out there, if it doesn't lead to any action in real time, then it's worthless to me, right? So I think deep introspection must be accompanied by bold action because otherwise there's no use. So yeah, I think it's definitely important that the introspection then leads to actionable steps. And I always like the people that I work with, whatever meeting we have or whatever program they're in, to walk away with this is the plan and this is what I'm going to do now.
So after you, let's say you're journaling, after you write down the answer to the question you're asking, what do I want? What do I really want? What do I want to want? How do you set yourself a goal of taking action?
Yeah, yeah. So I actually have a framework for this, which I think is very simplifying and very useful, therefore. So I call it the mental precision system. And basically you zoom out and you zoom in. So zoom out would be, let's look at the bigger picture, let's think. And then zooming in would be, let's act. So let's say you're facing a decision, right? Whether it's in your career, in your relationships, in your health, you're like a bit confused. And therefore you're thinking in all these opportunities and therefore you're a bit overwhelmed by what to choose. So you do nothing. You walk in circles and you sit there. So what do? We zoom out and we systemize the thinking. So, and we do this through three C's. So we start with the C of clarity, which is the why. So you start asking why. What am I optimizing for? What would different paths mean? What would different paths yield over time? How do I feel about this? You introspect and you think. You maximum do this for like 1 or 2 days. Then we go from the C of clarity to the C of curiosity. So we now know why, but now we're going to brainstorm on the how. So let's say I want to find out what I like in work. And it's either music production, it's either writing a book, or it's either consultancy. So how can I test them in an effective way? And you think, okay, how can I do it? And you brainstorm on the how with curiosity. So now we know the why. We have different hows on how to figure out our goal. And now we go to the third C, which is commitment. So we make some kind of experiment or plan that for an X amount of time, we're going to take action towards a goal. So let's say I want to try out music production. So I'm going to do 7 days of 1 hour of YouTube tutorials and making my own songs with the goal of seeing if I like it. Now we zoom in, and for 7 days, you're not allowed to think. So you commit, but you do it for a short amount of time. So you zoom in, you take this action, and now guess what? After 7 days, all of a sudden you've gained new information. You have new data points on yourself, on the process. You knew things that you didn't know 7 days ago. And now you're allowed to zoom back out and see, okay, how did this go? Did I get closer to my why or not? But either way, you have an answer. And now we go again, okay, from this new entry point. Why? How? Commit. And this is, I think, a loop that really breaks overthinking and that really moves you forward, right?
Yeah, have you? I mean, it just came out. Have you ever read Tiny Experiments by Dr. Anne Laura Kampf?
So I've only watched like a summary video of it, so I never read the whole book.
Okay, well, if you want, there's an episode on it on the Hidden Mentality podcast.
Yes.
But
Okay,
the
cool.
book is fascinating. And the reason I find it so fascinating what you brought up is I think action sometimes tends to be very paralyzing because of the goals we set and how we frame the goals. And I think a very important piece of the way you framed your goal is that it's not in someone else's control, it's completely in your control. So almost like, hey, when I set a goal to start music production and post it on my YouTube channel, the goal isn't, hey, I'm going to keep going until I get 1,000 views or 10,000 views. The goal is I'm going to do it for 7 days straight. And at the end of those 7 days, the success is dependent on me. Because even if I posted 20 days in a row and I didn't get 1,000 views, if my goal wasn't in my control, that would be a failure to me. That wouldn't make sense. But the important piece is that when you set a goal, make sure that the goal itself is in your control.
Yeah, yeah. I really like that. I use a similar construct, so I'll actually check out the episode you mentioned. But I use a similar construct where you have output goals and then you have input goals, right? So I did the same thing with starting my Instagram. So it's actually funny because people come up to me all the time in DMs like, wow, you have all these followers. And then how do I do it? How do I start? But I think the only way to start is to just start. So what I did at the beginning, I have a sequence for this. So whatever your goal is, you can use this sequence. So I start with asking, what is the big audacious goal? So I had written a book in, this was January 2024. And then I was like, how do I make people find this book? Maybe they can find it through social media, right? So in February 2024, I started We Think Deeply. 0 followers, 0 nothing. And I thought, what's the big audacious goal? So I thought, okay, if I have 100,000 followers, surely I would sell 1,000 books, for example. So I said, okay, big audacious goal, 100,000 followers in 2024. But then this is overwhelming, right? How do you do this? So then I thought, okay, let's make this output goal an input goal. So what behavior that I can perform would make this goal unlikely or impossible not to happen? So what's something I could do that makes it impossible that I don't have 100,000 followers in a year? And my answer was to come up with very valuable, refreshing content consistently. If I would do that every day and it would be really valuable to people's lives, surely they would follow, right? So, okay, then we have the input goal. All of a sudden it's this. Now, what would be the biggest reason for this not to happen, right? What would be the reason that this fails? for me to become inconsistent or to give up. And now, because we already have seen the biggest threat beforehand, we can also prevent it beforehand. So I was like, okay, I need a system. It needs to be fun, and I need to get 1% better every video. If I can keep with those three rules, it's unlikely that I give up, and it's unlikely that I'm not consistent at all. So now we have like a very input related plan, and then I gamified it into an experiment. I'm sorry. So that would be for me back then. I dedicated 60 days. So this was the C of commitment. 60 days of posting 1 times per day. With every 15 days, like I would batch create 15 videos at a time. And after 15 days, I would reflect like, okay, which ones worked, which ones didn't. And if after 60 days, I had 0 videos above 500 views, then I was allowed to stop. But if not, it showed enough traction to me to continue. And then I think video 20 or something went like completely viral. And it all started from there. But just by making it very input related and on you, you kind of gamify the effort. That's the reward and not the external reward. So I think that's a great frame.
So optimize your output goals into input goals.
Yes, I would say so. And then also reward yourself. So once I would do the 15 days, I was almost like, let's go. I did it, right? Like, well done. Let's do another 15 days instead of no one is watching, because the first 15 videos, I think I had on one like 3 views or something like, yeah.
But that's so fascinating to me. At what point do you use output goals? Because clearly you did say, oh, if I hit 20 and I didn't have that one video or 500 views, like you would have stopped. At what point is it healthy to use an output goal?
Yeah, I think like if you connect to your why in the beginning, it would just like to put a very big audacious goal at the core of it helps me, right? Or at least the way I'm wired, it makes me excited. I'm like, wow, imagine how different my life could be if I have this goal. And then putting it into an input goal afterwards, then I kind of take the reaps of the reward that I would have without it limiting me in the micro, in the day to day. Like the micro day to day is my input, but the big reward and the energy I get from it is the output.
And I like this version of making this whole experience very small by turning it into a mini experiment. Because I think that also removes the analysis paralysis part. Because if you make the whole experience saying, oh, I want to become a YouTuber.
Yeah.
At least my first thought is, okay, for the next 5 years, I've got to be doing this. I am screwed. But by making your experiment really small, you've gone, why don't I just post for 20 days? And that seems a lot more doable than posting for 5 years.
Yeah. Yeah. There's actually, I think, of course, this is like well described in many books, like make your goals small, etc. But there is a narrative that a public speaker from the Netherlands once told me. And I really like this narrative because I think especially nowadays, people who deem themselves smart or like great thinking, it's easy to loop in your own thoughts, right? And it feels like you're making progress, but you're standing still in real time. And he told me a narrative about a horse. So let's say you put a horse in the field and the farmer that owns the horse puts a bag of hay on the right side of the field and a ton of water on the left side of the field. And the horse is standing in the middle of that field. And the horse looks to the right, it's like, should I start eating the hay? And then he looks to the left and he's like, should I drink water? And he looks to the right and he's circling like hay, water. And eventually, doing this for a long enough time, the horse falls, like drops down, deaf, right? Because he didn't eat, he didn't drink. He was thinking about eating, then thinking about drinking. But if the horse would have just thought like, let me eat some hay, and then eat some hay, and then let me drink some water, like there wouldn't have been any problem, right? And I think this sometimes goes with us switching to different goals. Should I go for public speaking? Should I go for brand deals? Should I go for creating my own program? Should I write a book? And then not choosing anything. And eventually you've done nothing. When if you would have just done one thing first, you could have done the other thing later.
Yeah, and you brought up this point earlier. Oh, that's so good, man. Oh, I'm going to use that. I'm going to steal that from you. You brought this one point earlier that, especially with our generation, because we have access to everything, I think that creates real opportunity cost. Have you ever heard about the study with the jars of honey?
The jars of honey. No,
So
tell me.
there was a study done where they had one store put out, I think, 20 jars of honey.
Hmm.
And customers would walk by, go, "Wow, look at the diverse assortment of honey. I can get that. I can get this." Eventually, the customers didn't buy anything. Then they had the
Hmm.
second store that put out, I think, 2 jars of honey.
Yeah.
And now, obviously, they don't have that many flavors, that much assortment. It looks quite plain.
Yeah.
That store got way more jars of honey sold than the first
Yeah.
store. And it's just
Mm.
purely because of the opportunity cost of the customer. The customer in
Yeah.
the first store couldn't really decide on what honey, not because of how great the honey is, but because of what
Yeah.
they're missing out on. The
Yeah.
second store, you don't have a lot to miss out on.
Yeah. Yeah.
So by reducing your opportunity cost and almost focusing on one line and just choosing that one line, your
Yeah.
life is actually easier than trying to analyze almost every solution.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Makes a lot of sense. I think there's multiple types of experiments that show this, but it's a great one. I think, like, imagine you would be born into life, and your choices are you're a teacher, you're a doctor, you're a plumber, or you're an accountant. Right? Imagine there's a world where these are your only four options, and there's nothing else. You would just choose probably,
Yeah.
and like the choice would have just been way more simple that now you could do well endless of things, right? And I think it kind of it's the analysis paralysis that you mentioned, and we really try to figure it out by thinking when probably actually you figure it out by just doing, right? By just let me try this, let me try this, let me talk to people who do this and see if it resonates. Like sometimes you don't even have to actually do the thing, but just talk to people who do it and ask them good questions. Like, but just moving instead of sitting in your room, looking on the internet, sending out some resumes and whatnot. I think moving, acting, little experiments, small goals, this will give clarity and not really the extensively thinking and thinking and thinking, which only serves for an intensive period at the beginning, which is where my page is for.
Thinking out loud, maybe this is a bit of an odd question. I don't mean to stick it on you, but
Hmm.
we obviously talked earlier about exaggerating your costs and therefore the price you pay to switch lives looks a lot cheaper. Because you had that illusion of death,
Hmm.
did that scare you in any way that, oh, what if my first experiment doesn't work? Do I have the time to waste on experimenting?
That's an interesting question. No, it actually not at all, because I think the illusion of death, or the just the Stoics say it, right? Like Marcus Aurelius, like Stoic philosophers, I really like it personally. Um, Using death to your advantage, right? You don't even need to have the illusion of death, but just thinking, what if it ends here? What if it ends then? What if it ends then? What would be important to me? Like we can use this frame if you're comfortable with it to think about what's important. So when I'll give you a little bit more context because I think it's important. I had a job during my master's in consultancy where I would work in a Dutch milk factory, and every 8 seconds a milk carton would pass by. And the only reason why I was sitting there was if the barcode was horizontal, there wouldn't be a problem. The box would pass by and it would be automatically loaded into the truck. But if the barcode was vertical, the next machine wouldn't scan it and the whole machine would stop and it would have to be resetted, which would cost the company $1,700. So therefore, they put me there as a student to just see if the barcode was horizontal. That was all I had to do. So I went to the doctor, and after that, I was sitting there watching these boxes for 8 hours, which is why I completely negatively looped. So I had 8 hours to think about, fuck, what if, sorry for my language there, but what if it ends here? And just from sitting with that one prompt for 8 hours, it was very clear to me that when my time ends, whenever that may be, I want to be known to be fearless. I want to be known to have taken risks. I want to be known for have walked my own path. And the first thing that came to mind, I need to get the hell out of the Netherlands and fly as far as I can to Australia just to throw myself into the deep end. Whether it would go right or wrong, I think it will still be right in the big picture of things. That was the only conclusion that I came to. So I could take it with a lot of conviction because once you like bathe in a bath of like death, I think you actually get a very clarifying outcome that's very simple because there's no much overthinking. It's very clear what is the one thing that's important.
So you use the illusion of death to take action, but then stopped using it, basically.
Yeah, so I still circle back. So it's not that I sometimes worry about this when I put questions from Stoics or about the
Yeah.
perspective of death on Instagram. Like people will be scrolling on their phone. I don't want to make them like have a reality crisis, right? So I wouldn't say journal about death every single day. I don't think that's healthy at all. I just tend to use it like if I really reflect deeply. So I do this every year, like have a really deep period where I take like a weekend off, no phone, just me and my notebook, really thinking, then I will think about this. Like, hey, this was my hypothesis in 2024. This is what I did in 2025. What's my hypothesis now? And sometimes these change, sometimes they stay the same. So I would say really using dev is just something I use for the very big decisions, for the strategies that I have for the next decade, right? That's where I think it's important.
Yeah, so not using it for the smaller decisions or the smaller experiments, but for the bigger zooming out outlook. And is that
Yeah.
why it's so important not to actually think at all while you're doing the experiment?
Yeah, so I think the music production example I gave you earlier, it's actually an example that I had myself. So when I came back from Australia, I was like, in Australia, I just spent a year on getting to know myself. So I was journaling, I was just like researching me, basically, and of course, enjoying my time there and working and whatnot. But then I came back and I was like, okay, I know who I am, I know what I want, I know what I stand for, but now what do I do? What will be my career trajectory? And always I had the thought about music production. I basically always thought, like, what if secretly I'm a musical genius who just never tried? And this thought was really painful for me. And I looped in this thought for years already, but I never tried. So I was like, okay, how can I do something to either see if I should be a DJ or to just leave it for the rest of my life and stop this thought? So then I set up an experiment to do it 20 hours for 4 weeks. So I did 5 hours a week. I had a part-time freelance job at the time in sales. Um, and then the only goal was to make one song. But when I started, the first 3 hours, I think I used Logic Pro on MacBook, and I didn't know anything, right? I was watching a tutorial, all the buttons didn't work. It was so frustrating because I was a beginner, a complete beginner. And if I had allowed myself to rethink, I'm sure I would have quit within those 3 hours because it was horrible. It was not enjoyable at all. But I made a contract with myself that I zoomed in and I was going to do it for 20 hours. And if not, I would have failed and I would have, like, my self belief would have lowered, my confidence would have lowered. I would have deemed myself a failure. And because of that, and because of not allowing you to rethink, I saw it through. I did the 20 hours and I made a song. I won't let you listen to it because it's awful. But then I made it, and then I was like, okay, this was fun, but let me not be a DJ. Let me do the next thing on my list. So I think by zooming in, not allowing yourself to rethink, you give yourself an opportunity to see things through and to get the actual answer and to build self-belief. Like, hey, I did this. I made a promise to myself. I kept it. What's next?
Yeah, I say this almost every podcast, but I feel like this is the important time to say it. You don't know what you don't know. And the reason I bring that up is sometimes we only go after our passions, but we don't know what we don't know. So sometimes we can actually develop our passions by becoming really good at something we were really shit at before.
Yeah, yeah,
So that it
that's
always
true.
fascinates me because whenever we pop the question saying, "What do I like to do?" my mind sometimes just goes blank. Like, "Oh, I like to do this," but then it just goes, "Oh," and then I don't know if you see this a lot, but a lot of the time, especially there's this concept called ikigai,
Hmm.
where you ask yourself, "What do you like?" Then you ask yourself, what are you really good at?" And you ask
Yeah,
yourself, "What does the world need?"
yeah,
I think ikigai is good. But my personal opinion is that ikigai can sometimes stop you, because I think the question of what are you good at should be changed to what can you be good at. Because that what are you good at, for me, hinders me in a lot. Like sometimes, when I started this podcast, and I still think I'm really shit, I'm going to keep that mindset because that allows me to keep growing. If I wanted to start a podcast and I went to Ikigai and said, what am I really good at? Well, podcasting is not one of them because I've never done a podcast. I would have stopped. So I think the question should be altered to what can you be good at?
Yeah. I really resonate with that, and I think it's very true. So I think there's things that maybe naturally you gravitate towards, but then, and I think this is a frame by Alex Hormozy, where he says, like, are you really naturally good at this, or is it just the early evidence that you were exposed to it, right? So do I believe that I'm naturally good at this, or is it just because my parents exposed me to it at an early age and that now I think I'm naturally good at it? And this we don't know, right? So I think actually a frame that I like to use for this is you could say, I am a bad public speaker, right? So you say, I'm a bad public speaker, therefore, if you're in uni and you're with a group and someone has to do the presentation, you say, not me, because I'm a bad public speaker. Now, you don't give yourself the opportunity to learn or to fail, so you don't do it. Therefore, you're not practicing it, you're not trying to become better, you're not gaining experience in it, and therefore now you are actually a bad public speaker. So it's kind of a self-fulfilling loop. But now if you say, I do what a bad public speaker would do, so it's not your identity, it's your behavior, all of a sudden, so what if now I take the presentation? Now you fail, but you become slightly better. And now, okay, I did what a not so much bad public speaker would have done, but let me do it again. And now all of a sudden do this 2 years, and all of a sudden you would say, I am a good public speaker. But no, you're now doing what a good public speaker would do, and therefore you are a good public speaker, right? So it's not identity-based, it's more behavior-based. And I find this very, very empowering, because all the beliefs that I have about myself that are negative, I can now reframe, put in some action, and all of a sudden they are positive. So it's a very empowering belief that even if this is complete nonsense, it serves me well. So I think it's a very useful one.
Because you're essentially breaking the mental ceiling that you held for yourself, and you can still be shit at something, but do good at something, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's kind of like a video game, right? I don't know if you know Mario.
Yeah, of course, mate.
Yeah. So in my time, it's not that I'm that much older, but this was like the shit, right? So it would be very normal to me if it was Mario Bros or Mario Tennis. I think we even had at some point that Wario had a lot of power, right? But he wasn't so fast. And then Yoshi was super fast but didn't have a lot of power, for example. But they were very rigid. But then you could also put them through practice in some games. So you would put Mario on a practice and he could increase its power, right? And this to us is very normal. We put him to practice, he increases his power. Or on FIFA, the video game, we put my left wing through a training and now he has better dribbling. But the same goes to life. If I think, for example, believe I'm inflexible, but then I'm never stretching, I'm never doing yoga, so of course I'm inflexible. But if I start to do that, suddenly my skill bar, which would be the green rectangle bar, grows, right? And I become more flexible. So am I really inflexible, or am I just doing what an inflexible person would do? I think this is very empowering, because that basically means that you can decide what your identity is, which I find very useful.
That's so good. I don't mean to keep popping stories on you. Do you know who Roger Bannister is?
Sorry?
Roger Bannister. I would actually presume you wouldn't know, because I didn't know until maybe like 2 weeks ago. You do know who he is?
I've heard his name, but please tell me.
I didn't even know. I didn't even know. So he was this runner back in the 1950s. And he was I hope I'm saying this right. He was the first person to, I think, run a mile in under 4 minutes. And this was like a long record that was not broken.
Yeah.
Now, everyone looks at Roger Bannister as going, wow, he was the first person to break this record. Wow, under 4 minutes. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Within the next year, and maybe not a lot of people talk about this,
4
more people broke that record.
Yeah.
And to me, that is fascinating. And I think where Roger Bannister deserves the credit is,
Yeah.
yes, he was the first one to run the 4 miles, but he was actually the first one to break the mental ceiling that a mile can be run under 4 minutes. Because once he ran that mile under 4 minutes, four more people came along saying, oh, what the hell? That can be done? Let me just go do it. So it's almost like we sometimes crave a proof of evidence before we can act.
That's I know the story now that you told it. I know it, but I think it's a great narrative, right? And I do believe, and this always, so I like to be very practical, right? Because I think people sometimes DM me and they are you a life coach? Well, if there's one thing that I'm not, and let's make it very clear, I'm not a life coach and I don't have the ambition to be a life coach. I really like to be practical, right? And I think many of these frames can be vague, but this to me is quite practical because you could say, and there's a quote, I'll probably butcher it, but whether you believe you can or you believe you can't, in both cases, you're right. And but I do think it's so true. And the people I surround myself with that energize me so much are all people who have delusional beliefs, right? Who believe that the world is moldable. Because every person that started something big, when he first time spoke about achieving this, probably no one believed them, but then for some reason they made it work. So I think sometimes being delusional about what's possible and just saying like I believe it's possible and I have an intuition, a gut feeling that it is possible. I really tend to care, like give a lot of care about these gut feelings and figure out like why do I believe this, and then if I really believe it, just stick with it. So that sounds a bit vague, and this is all a bit up in the air, right? But I do believe it's very valuable.
Yeah, it's delusional until it's not, right? So,
Yeah,
like,
and then sometimes you're wrong, right? When I started my clothing brand, I also had the belief that this was going to be the next big Dutch clothing brand, right? And it worked well for a bit. Eventually, I ended up selling the company, and it didn't work out as I wanted to. But then I needed that naivety. I needed that delusion to even start. And I learned so much from doing it. So even if it doesn't turn out in reaching the goal, you'll probably still have so many valuable assets along the way. So delusion and naivety, I think, can be useful in the beginning, especially of a young entrepreneur or a young dreamer.
yeah, and if you fall short, no one really cares as much
No,
as you think.
no, that's like I sometimes like I just finished one of the, so I have these mental clarity sprints. Next thing that will come will be a mental precision weekend. So basically, I take the frame of a Bill Gates who does his thinking weeks, right? Once a year or twice a year, he goes away from everything and he just thinks, right? He introspects. Stephen Bartlett speaks about the trenches and the clouds, where in the clouds he thinks, he zooms out. I'm gonna like how do I say it? Compress all my thinking systems into a weekend where we zoom out, and then after the weekend you'll have an action plan of what to do. And what I wanted to say on this was so wait, what were we discussing before? The last
The
question?
mental ceiling almost, and that we need a proof of
Yeah.
evidence. And then I said, no one really cares if you fall
Yeah,
short.
yeah. Thanks for that. So that's the thing. Like someone asked in the latest program, like, how do you put everything into perspective? And I think there's two paradoxical frames that we can use for this. So if you zoom out, there's the planet Earth, then there's, I don't know, eight other planets, then there's a sun, then there's millions other suns with billions of other planets and trillions of other whatnot, and it keeps growing, and we're so irrelevant. So everything you do doesn't matter at all, right? So why be afraid? But this could also be empowering and it could be terrifying. But then at the same time, you could say, well, if that's the case, then nothing matters. So why even bother to do anything? But then I zoom in into the micro. I look at my mom. I look at my dad. My family is very important to me. I look at my brothers. I look at my best friend. And I'm like, well, I could impact their reality so much by being happy myself. So everything that I do matters. So I tend to zoom in to the super micro and zoom out to the extreme macro and use the perspective that serves me, if that makes sense. Um, yeah, so that's a frame that I really like.
That's brilliant. And You know, as a podcaster, people typically say don't ask yes or no questions, but I feel like I have to ask you this.
Hmm.
Do you feel fulfilled in life?
Ooh, that's that's a good one. I would say yes. Yeah, definitely. So there's obviously always things that I want, right? That I don't have. And the funny thing is that we oftentimes strive to have things, and then once we have them, we want the next thing, and we forget that now we have what once I wished for. So I think, um, like you will always hear gratitude, but I just think sitting with all the blessings from time to time. I mean, I have so many things right now that if I would tell my 21-year-old me, he would be like, no way, right? Like, no way you're doing this. But then now I look at the people who are ahead of me, and then sometimes I'm like, shit, why can't I figure this one thing out like he or she has? But then the moments that I have, like the grains of sand that I have sometimes that I just feel blessed and like randomly grateful on a day, I think those are enough proof that I'm very fulfilled. So I try to combine bold ambition of the things that I still want with anchored gratitude of the things that I already have. And then if I would lose everything, I could still just get a job and I would be fine. And the only thing that matters is to be healthy and to have my family, right? So it's always a weird balance. But does that answer your question? And if I could put it back, how would you answer the question?
Using the framework you've just used, and I think it's a really healthy framework, I would have to say I'm on path for it because last year I want to change, and I think if we're always looking in the future, it's that Conor McGregor quote for me. I don't know. It's that like if you live in the future, you're anxious. If you live in the past, you're depressed. But if you live in the present, you're happy. And what I've realized is the same way you put it. If I told myself a year ago what I've started now or what I'm trying to do, I
Hmm.
think my year ago self would go, "Yeah, I'd take that." And I think if I keep asking that every year and my answer is, "Yeah, I take that," then I think fulfillment is on track.
That's amazing. You can be proud of that, I think.
Thanks, mate. And
Mhm.
Frank, time flies when I'm having so
Yeah.
much fun and I'm learning from you.
Hmm.
I always ask my guests this, but
Hmm.
I'm gonna change it up slightly. I usually
Hmm.
ask what's the best advice you've ever received, but I'm gonna change it up.
Hmm.
If my viewers and me were to go journal often or once a week, what is the one journaling prompt you would leave us with?
Mm. I would say, how are you doing? Insert answer. Why?
That simple.
It's that simple. It's when people ask me, how do I journal? I say, how are you doing? Bad. Why? Because of this. Why? How are you doing? Good. Why? What changed? Right? If you don't know what to ask, sit down. How are you doing? Go from there. You'll be surprised with what questions you end up in the train of thought.
It's that simple, yeah. It's that simple of self introspection. Frank, it's been an absolute honor.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, a bit of a stupid caveat. I'm guessing all my viewers know you, but where can we find you and what's
Mhm.
next?
Yeah, no, thanks. Also, thanks for having me. So I think I can display also what we discussed earlier because I think it's valuable also to other people. So my name is Freek van Litsenburg. I'm the owner of We Think Deeply, so an Instagram page where I help people get to know themselves. We run. My goal is to be the biggest online retreat on self-reflection. So as I told with the Mental Precision Weekend, I speak, I write books. Well, there's things to come. So I get quite some inbounds about people wanting me to be on their podcast. But what Rishi did great is you reached out to me on like every single platform and you showed a lot of grit to me. Like, hey, I really want to make this work. You showed a lot of care, a lot of discipline, and I kind of felt like I recognized myself or like my slightly younger self in you, and so I really like the energy of that, and that's why I was like, let's do it. Between 12 and 1, I had time anyway. So thanks to you for having me, and people can find me on Instagram with We Think Deeply, also on TikTok, LinkedIn, YouTube, whatnot.
Thanks, man. I appreciate the little cheeky little compliment. That means more than you know. So
Cool,
mate,
man. Cool.
you're killing it, mate. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and have a good day.